Good evening and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. We're very glad to have the Environment Minister Prakash Javadekar with us. 2015 ended with what India, the US and many other nations called a historic agreement in Paris. But the big question we're asking in 2016 is how will it be implemented for India internationally and also of course at home. Also joining me tonight is Mr. Shyam Saran. Well, Mr. Shyam Saran, of course, currently the Center for Policy Research, but he was also the ex-Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's envoy for climate change. And of course, amongst his many, many achievements, he was also the architect of the Indo-US nuclear deal. I'm also joined by Mr. Chandra Bhushan. He's the Deputy Director at the Center for Science and Environment. Also with me, agricultural scientist Devinder Sharma, and of course, a young audience here to ask questions to the Minister and all my other panelists. Thank you all very much for being here. Mr. Javadekar, it was a tough battle that India fought in Paris, extremely tough, because at one point we were being called a villain, we were being called a spoiler, whether it was by the US Secretary of State. Even the New York Times was very tough on India. We came out with agreement and you were very happy after that. In fact, you gave Mr. Kerry a huge bouquet. Is this all about the smiles, the handshakes? When it boils down to it, what do you think is actually historic about it?
I think what is important and historic about it is that earlier Kyoto regime, the Kyoto Protocol, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan itself walked out of it. They didn't ratify it. This time all 196 countries have agreed to it. And to bring consensus of 196 countries is not easy. And therefore, reaching the agreement, because this is a new regime, it will be a durable agreement, and it is an agreement which will ensure us into a new regime where all countries are taking actions, but developed countries have to take more actions and developing countries will be allowed development space. So that differentiation was the key issue, and that is addressed properly. So there is across all pillars of mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology, capacity building, transparency, on all pillars, the differentiation between the developed country actions and developing country actions is very clearly mentioned. I think that's the landmark achievement of this agreement, because it allows developing world to develop on a sustainable growth path, but it allows them the development space and also imposes more restrictions on developed world.
So, in a sense, if I interpret it slightly simply, you're saying that at least India has been allowed to use coal for its energy needs, for its growth needs, and for, as many people have said, that for India to be lifted out of poverty, you need to use coal energy or more traditional forms of energy.
I'll just tell you about the coal, the one myth or one actual, the real story is...
You're saying it's a Western world myth.
Today, we are using less coal in absolute terms than US uses. So, though it's a 1/3 of the population, it is using more coal than India. Since 1990, because everybody knows from 1990 that coal is a harmful thing. But since then, China and US put together have consumed 63 billion tons of coal. We have consumed 9 billion tons. So it is 15%. So my is 1 ton, there is 7 ton. So coal, we are not the villain. Villains are first and second. And therefore, I am saying that it's not about coal. It's about walking a greener path. And that is more important. We want our air to be clean, our water to be clean, our environment to be clean, our energy to be clean, and we want more green. Clean India, Green India, Swachh Bharat, Harit Bharat.
Very good on slogans, and I think you outlined that very simply. But Mr. Saran, come in on that, because both on the coal aspect and also as somebody who's seen negotiations, you've seen firsthand how tough it was, and it is good that in fact in that sense the NDA carried forward the UPA argument on climate and common but differentiated responsibilities. Do you think, were you happy with the agreement, and what do you see as the issue ahead, including on the usage of coal, and not just coal but our energy basket needed for India's growth needs?
So first of all, I think the Minister is correct that to be able to get a consensus outcome among 192 countries is an achievement, and I think we should recognize that. What is perhaps worrying is that we have settled for what I call a very low base. So if you look at what is required in relation to the kind of elemental threat to humanity which people say climate change represents, then we are still very far away from actually marshalling the kind of effort which is required to address that particular threat. So, UNFCCC itself said that if you take all the different contributions, the nationally determined contributions which have been put forward, if you aggregate them together, you are still on a path to maybe 2.7 degrees centigrade or 3 degrees centigrade rise, when this particular conference has said not only should we not exceed 2 degrees centigrade, but we should settle for 1.5. Now, if you have an ambitious target like that, your effort is certainly not anywhere near what the level of threat is. So that is one point. Second point is that while the issue of equity has been addressed, and I would like to compliment the minister that I think the Indian delegation fought very hard to get that principle of common and differentiated responsibility represented in the document, and as he says, across all spectrum of actions. But the one thing which is very important and is missing is historical responsibility. Because much of the entitlement that developing countries have to finance, to technology from developed countries to make that transition from a fossil fuel based economy to a renewable based economy to a clean energy based economy is also related to the issue of historical responsibility. And that historical responsibility has been put aside. What we are really looking at is whatever future actions are to be taken. Yes, there will be a differentiation between developing and developed countries, but
the years that have brought us here,
it will not be on the basis of what has happened in the past. So the very fundamental character of the UNFCCC, that I'm afraid has been in a sense completely diluted. One word about coal, which you mentioned. Again, I agree with the minister that it is like the pot calling the kettle black in a sense. But there is the issue of how do we make a transition from large use of coal as an energy source to renewable energy. Now, in that, the United States of America is not moving from coal to renewable energy. It is moving from coal to gas because they have a lot of gas, shale gas available.
And the current policies just continue.
Yes, it is relatively more clean than coal is, but it's still a fossil fuel. On the other hand, we are actually moving from fossil fuel based economy to a renewable based economy, to a clean source based economy. So I think there is no reason for India to be defensive on this account.
In fact, you can completely recast India really as really much more a protagonist than a villain. But Chandra Bhushan, come in because you also were in Paris at the time these negotiations were happening, and you've seen the politics that eventually does play out, and especially the point being made that the US and China, and the US especially, trying to lead the way, the agendas that came out at this conference. Do you think in that sense India has achieved enough? And also, do we now need to shift our focus perhaps on what we're doing back home as we talk about the international agreement, but are we doing enough back home for Indians? I mean, it's not only an issue about the global network and being part of a global alliance, but what about what we're doing back home in our policies here?
First of all, I think what we got was probably the best we could have got. And I must say that I did see this year's negotiating team very different than the past. They were willing to experiment and take risk. I think they used the word carbon space very creatively to get the words they got in the agreement. You must understand that what happened in Paris started in 2009. In fact, 2008, Poznan. It was a very well-planned strategic move of the US from 2009 onwards to get rid of the convention. UN convention, and I believe they were partly, not fully, they were partly successful in doing that by the time we have reached Paris in 2015. I think from our side, from 2009 onwards, I think we didn't have any strategy in place, just to say that we wanted to defend the convention. That was India's strategy, that we want to defend the convention, we want to have equity and CBDR. However, we didn't have the alternative on the table, which could have ensured that we could have got much better than what we got in Paris. So Mr. Sharan and the minister has already said what we got. I believe next 4 to 5 years is going to be much more important. I believe Paris is actually the beginning of negotiations, not the end. You are going to have series of things that is to be negotiated from now onwards. How countries will report, how the review of countries' action will take place. We are now thinking, Paris Agreement has agreed on a universal carbon market. What will be the design of that carbon market? It could be in our favor if we work very hard, but it could go against us. Forestry is going to become a big issue. Carbon credits can be generated from forest. We will have to see how that happens. So I believe next 3 to 5 years is going to be very important for India as far as international negotiations are concerned. We could get it right and make sure that Paris is in some advantage to us, or we could get it wrong.
I'm going to bring in, we've also got joining us now Mr. Harish Salve, Senior Supreme Court Advocate, but of course also now known for his role as amicus curiae, in that really, in a sense, I'd use the word historic litigation which is going on at the Supreme Court, actually setting in place measures which many would have argued that the government, these are legislative measures which the Supreme Court has stepped in. Just some of them, of course, is banning registration of fresh diesel cars over 2000 cc for 3 months. They've also said trucks can't pass through Delhi. But Mr. Salve, just to take this beyond Delhi, because it's really about a larger issue of a court doing what should have been pretty evident to governments around us, whether it's state or center. Do you think that when we talk about climate change, when we talk about environmental framework, we are missing the larger message when we talk only about global conventions and don't look at how our policies are working and impacting citizens of India?
Your point is very well taken. I don't claim to be an expert in what has been negotiated in Paris, and
yes,
I completely subscribe to the theory that it's not a question of whether we could have, whether we should have got more, but the question is whether we could have got more, and that's a very difficult question to answer. But when it comes to implementation, as somebody just spoke of the carbon markets, it comes to the implementation, that is where India's seriousness and India's political capacity to implement hard decisions in larger interest of climate protection and larger interest of clearing up the pollution becomes troublesome. I start by saying that it has been a very welcome change this year to see the state government and the union government both supportive of measures that would curb pollution rather than ridiculing these measures, which has been my past experience. But we spoke of carbon credits. Let's take Indian forests, for example, and which also impinges on your question of what the courts should be doing. In 1996, when the forest conservation case began in Supreme Court, where I have also been an amicus since from 1996 to present date, and there we found that the Forest Conservation Act was put in place by Mrs. Gandhi in 1980, recognizing that we need to increase our forest wealth, and the law had been observed in its breach, because every time you rigorously enforce the Forest Conservation Act, you strike at populist measures. And it was huge. It was a huge exercise for the court to try and get some sense of responsibility and enforce a law which Parliament had made to contain the felling of forests. Added to that were the scams related to forests, which is another dimension in India every time you probe into such an area. So implementing these measures of shifting from fossil to renewable energy, and within fossil fuel from coal to cleaner forms of energy, also is a huge effort. And let me tell you, and I am start by saying I'm Reliance's lawyer, but you will be horrified to know that the government refuses to pay $8 for domestic gas to Reliance or ONGC or whoever can produce it at that price. But we want to import gas at 13, and then at 13 gas becomes too expensive. Now, gas is clearly a cleaner fuel than coal. Look at what happened in Delhi when the Delhi government said, shut Badarpur down. They said, no, where the power come from? They said, Bhavana is sitting at 13% plant load factor. So, small changes which will move us within fossil from the less clean fuel to the cleaner fuels, and then from fossil to not fossil requires hard decisions. And if we keep playing to the gallery as we do in India, and which are political compulsions in India, that's where India's real challenge lies.
So, Mr. Javadekar, can you actually do it? Because this question about lobbies, and that in that sense, perhaps the Delhi Chief Minister has stolen a march on the centre, because he's made pollution very much the centre of his government's governance agenda. Whereas, in one sense, the Environment Ministry will pass it on to say the fuel will come under the Transport Ministry. You've seen earlier in the Supreme Court, in fact, and Mr. Salve has pointed this out, that governments have over the years often said, no, we can't do it at this pace. We cannot do this until they're actually forced to do it. Can the Environment Ministry take charge? You've had the situation where your own Women and Child Welfare Ministry said that India is ignoring the problem of the emissions that we itself are creating. So, is the Environment Ministry actually walking the talk? Will you take tough decisions even if it means ignoring populists or what people think voters want?
Actually, from April 2015, we started working very seriously on the issue of pollution, Delhi. And I found out first that it is not only the Delhi municipal limits or NCR municipal limits. It involves Haryana government, Punjab government, Rajasthan government, Uttar Pradesh government, Delhi government, all 12 corporations within the Delhi airshed, as we call it. And we conveyed 4 meetings till today. We had first 3 months action plan. Now we have 1 year's action plan from each agency involved.
But governments are very good at doing meetings, Mr. Javadekar. What happens after these meetings? All right.
You will bear with me for 2 minutes.
Yes.
So we conveyed, and we are taking all again. See, if you are interested only in headline grabbing, then I can give crazy orders. But if you want real solutions, then real solution lies in improving the quality of fuel and improving the quality of engines of cars, as Harish Salveji is saying.
You think ODN is a crazy order?
No, I have not said it. What I am saying is, no.
You just said it.
No, I said that headline grabbing can be done by many things, by many announcements. So, I am saying that the real answer lies it. But it can't be a switch on, switch off. Oh, I want Euro 6 within 1 year. It can't happen because you need 60,000 crores of investment, plants to be refitted, the refineries to be modified. It takes 3 years' time. The car lobby, they were saying that, oh, designing the car for Euro 6 compliant to the Indian road conditions and Indian driving habit is a bit difficult task. We said, now nothing doing, you have to do it, and now everybody is falling in line. I think that's the best way. Of Delhi pollution, the real answer of congestion tax, we have already said yes to the courts. But more importantly, the bypasses, which were discussed for 10 years, but work was not started, we have started it. In 1 year, you will have 1 bypass, 2 years, you will have both the bypasses. No undestined vehicle will come in Delhi. That's the real answer.
But I want to just go across to Devinder Sharma, an agricultural scientist who's with us from Chandigarh. Mr. Sharma, when you're hearing this conversation, when we talk even about pollution, for instance, and a lot of the blame has been put on fires burning in Punjab and Haryana. Meetings happen, but yet that doesn't stop. But when we look at pollution, when we look at climate change and the impact on Indian agriculture and Indian farmers, we see suicides being reported at a record high in Marathwada this year. The problem seems to be that when we talk about populist policies, we don't link these issues at all as populist. That, I mean, for instance, farmers' families vote, they're impacted, yet these are never considered as populist issues or addressed like that. Do you think that's what needs to change?
I think one point that I need to highlight here is what the Prime Minister Narendra Modi said in one of his op-ed in Financial Times before the Paris Convention, and he said that it is the lifestyle of the rich countries which is actually creating this climatic upheaval in the world. I think that was a very important statement that he made, but I am not surprised that that was not on the negotiating table, because we all know that the Western lifestyle is non-negotiable. It is something which is politically incorrect to even talk about. So having said that, the point I want to make, hold on, sir. Yeah. Sir, hold on, let me complete. hold on. The point I want to make is that we in India are actually following the same lifestyle. We are in a haste to follow the same lifestyle. You know, and what is worrying is for us is that we are trying to ape China, have a kind of a race with China. China is in crisis, as we all know. Not only with what we see in Beijing from the air pollution, but also as far as agriculture is devastated across China. China is now become one of the world's biggest provider of subsidies, agriculture subsidies, because they now realize they've done the mistake. They need to correct it by pumping in more of money into that sector. I think in case of India, we are not learning any lesson. We are just trying to follow another kind of a approach which will create more problems in the years to come. Why I'm saying this, as you rightly mentioned, in India, the agriculture situation is so dicey today, so worrisome, that in December alone, if 112 people die in Marathwada, and that's because of the drought. We have had 2 successive years of drought, and we are now getting into another year when the economist has predicted it will be the most terrible El Nino impact all over the world in 2016. Now, I am more worried about what is going to happen in 2016 than what they are predicting for 2050. So I think this is something where we are not drawing a lesson. If we have to really change, we must change according to not follow the Western kind of model into our own agriculture also, into our forestry and so on, but also adapt to our conditions which are really conducive for our environment. Let me give you an example. You know, fertilizer, the more the fertilizer we pump into agriculture, it releases something called as nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is 3 times more potent than methane. But where is the effort in India to reduce the usage of chemical fertilizers? We want to pump in more fertilizer in the garb of raising productivity. But why can't we move to non-chemical agriculture? I think that should be the fundamental role that the Ministry of Environment should be suggesting. But also Ministry of Environment, on the other hand, if you look at their entire, the way of operation that they have been conducting, I think there are a lot to be desired from the way the Ministry of Environment is working. It is more in consonance with the kind of lobbies that want certain things to be implemented. I think there are questions on the role Ministry of Environment is the way it is trying to implement a number of its decisions. So privatizing forests and then getting on to these kinds of things is not what the country requires.
I'm going to get Prakash Javadekar to quickly respond to that. The Environment Ministry has been controversial in the previous government, in the governments before that. The question about lobbies and how it's worked, you all have accused of a Jayanti tax. Again, now you've got, this time the Congress accuses you all and say, why are clearances being given so fast? Why are environmental norms being completely, that the Environment Ministry is actually working for industry rather than for the environment?
No, that's unfair. What we have done away with
clearances?
What we have done away with the delays. We have deleted the word delay, and that is why we are processing transparently. We are processing online. We are making norms more stringent, but it is automatic, means it becomes a standardized, and so the delays are avoided.
No, but
so you see more cases.
Who monitors those norms? The problem is it's all kind of self-supervisory. Who's
no, it
monitoring
is not
those
self-supervised. It is completely monitored, and it is more importantly, the norms, environmental norms have been made more stringent, but we have standardized the norms, and therefore the delays are avoided. And delay avoidance, I think, is a good thing to begin with. One aspect which Devinder ji referred to, lifestyle, I am very happy to note that Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, placed before the world very positively and proactively 2 concepts of climate justice for poorer countries and poorer sections of the globe, and lifestyle issues, because unless lifestyle is addressed, you can't mitigate the challenge. And therefore, both these concepts have been accepted in the preamble. That's also a very important
Let me get a quick round of audience questions. I'll go to the next thing. The odd-even formula, we're bang in the middle of it in a sense. How many of you all support the odd-even formula? So it's a mixed, some of you all don't. Who would like to ask the first question?
In Paris Agreement, many environmentalists and experts are saying that instead of dealing with the environmental concern, we have given path to the commercialization of nature. And even Rajendra Singh, the waterman, went on saying that this agreement is against the Kyoto, Copenhagen and Rio summit. And instead of, and after that, the goof of typological error like shall and should and this has given us.
You gave away too
No,
much.
actually that's not, that's an impression, and everybody has a preview to his views, so Rajendra Singh also.
So what do you want to
But
say?
I don't agree is because that shall and should was actually a typo thing. We insisted that in finance it should be shall and it remained shall. But in mitigation it was always should and it became shall because finance had also shall. So mitigation also was
Now we know
also
why that's a shall and should
that
is so
was
important.
a correction done. So there was no issue actually. But people made that it is done in finance. No, it is not.
Let me just come in on this odd even scheme. Will you support it, Mr. Minister? Will you do odd even cars, though you're exempt, though the Delhi government has exempted you?
We are, no, I have got my private car also, so I will use it only on when it is allowed.
How will you travel otherwise?
No, because I have got an office car, that's a different thing.
So you'll use that for official...
But my personal car, which I use to go to gym every day morning, I drive myself. So I will take only on even dates because it is 6-4, 6-8. So I will do that.
So do you applaud Mr. Kejriwal for this initiative?
See, it is not about applauding. If somebody wants to experiment, that is the space needs to be given.
right.
But then people will ask why
right.
only 15 days? There are many countries with having permanent. But is it a permanent solution to improve the quality of fuel as early as possible and to improve the quality of car is the real answer.